Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoy this sort of content. What I have for you today is a build of my first PC. I've never built one before, but I've always wanted to, and I actually built this back in May, and I've done a series of testing on the channel that you could see some games I played and some live streaming, and it's definitely met my needs. And so if you're interested in PC building, I put this video together of the process. I'm in no way an expert in PC building, so I may make mistakes along the way, but you know, I tried to include as much as I could, along with some diagrams and some things that were helpful to me along the process. So sit back and enjoy the build, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. So after installing the CPU, and make sure you line up that CPU with the little arrow in the top right corner. I tried to show that a couple seconds ago if you need to go back and look. I was just using the included fan for this portion of the install, but I do go back and change the CPU fan later. That part is optional. I just found one that looked aesthetically pretty cool, and it also had really good ratings from other people, so I went with that one and changed it to an aftermarket cooler later on in the process. But this one may serve you well. I just figured I'd put that note in here. Next up, we got the RAM and the M.2 solid state drive that I went with, and I'll make sure to include links to everything in the description below, to all the parts in the build. Obviously you could find other parts that might work well, but this is what I found to work best for me, and I hope it helps you. On this motherboard, to use the dual channel RAM, I use slots 2 and 4 on the board there, so that's one thing to note, and they'll just line up and lock into place that one way. Next up, we're going to be removing the heatsink for the M.2 slot, and this will give us access to install the solid state drive. I use the Sabrent Rocket, and it's a PCI 4.0 M.2 solid state drive, and this board is compatible with that. And so there was just those screws on the front, and then I realized after there's an additional 2 screws on the back of the motherboard that I'm going to remove right here. Here you'll find some thermal paste that was for the chipset fan, along with some thermal paste for the M.2 drive. Just make sure to remove that blue tape covering the thermal paste for the M.2 drive right here. Okay, now we're ready to install the motherboard into the case. Make sure to install this back plate for the motherboard in first, and I just had to give it a little bit of a push all along the sides and edges, and eventually it will pop into place, and so you'll see it pop out there and along the edge, and just take your time with it. Next we'll double check to make sure everything lines up at the slots, and everything appears to be good to go here. So now we'll have, I think it was around 8 or 9 screws that you'll secure the motherboard in place. And this Cooler Master case is really an awesome case for a first time builder like myself. It had all the appropriate locations, and the motherboard risers were all in place, so it made it very easy for me to build. And so if you are considering a case, this is a Cooler Master. I believe it's an MB311L, and I'll make sure to put a link below. So you may want to pause it right here. This is a diagram just showing all the different power plugs for the board here, and I want to zoom in. It's really hard to film and show this part, so and this is where the HD audio went. So you may want to pause it and rewind it there just to double check you are connecting those in the right place. There's also some other YouTube videos that might show that part better, but that was probably one of the trickiest parts of the build. And then getting the power supply in place. Make sure to have all of your connections lined up correct, because I did make a mistake and I failed to put one of the motherboard, I think it was one of the motherboard connectors in place, and so the computer didn't post the first time I tried. So double check all of the connections for the power supply before you install it, because it makes it much easier. It's harder to get in there and switch plugs out when it's installed into the case. And so that's one thing that I wanted to add and encourage you to do if you are building yourself, or if this is the first time building a PC. I had to disconnect and reconnect the HD audio cable to get the power supply in, so that's what I did here. Next up, we'll be adding some other components to the case. This is the Scythe Fuma 2 CPU cooler, and I also got some additional fans. I went with the Cooler Master Sickle Flow 120 ARGB kit, and so the case came with 2 fans already, and so I just purchased this additional 3 fans. And here's another diagram that helped me along the way with daisy chaining them all together, so you might want to stop it here and see if that helps you as well. And so the fans plugged into the ARGB header that's on the motherboard, and I was just left with the mess of cables in the back that I'm going to have to clean up later in the process. Next up, I went with installing the CPU cooler, and so I removed the other one. I've had to clean up the thermal paste and install this one, but it's pretty straightforward. They made it very simple with this particular CPU cooler, so that's one thing that I really enjoyed about the process installing this. It was straightforward and simple, and they also included this extra long Phillips head screwdriver to make it easy to lock in the screws once you get the CPU cooler in place. one thing to note with lining up the CPU cooler is once everything's in place here, it has those little guided holes up top that make it easy to use that extended Phillips head screwdriver that they include. And as you tighten the screws, just go, rotate your way. So tighten one a little bit, then go to a different screw, tighten that one a little bit until all of them are securely in place, and that makes it a gradual process and not too tight in one area. It also helps hopefully to spread the thermal paste evenly. And I didn't show me applying the thermal paste, but everyone has a different method there. There's plenty of other great videos that might help you to see how to apply thermal paste. But the nice thing about this cooler is it did include some thermal paste for you to use on the motherboard. I think it was like a Grizzly thermal paste or something along the lines of that. I went with the Sapphire Nitro Plus 5700 XT, and this GPU has been a beast and it's definitely met my needs up to this point. I also forgot to mention that the power supply is an Enermax 750 watt gold rated PSU, and here's some sleeved extension cables that I got from Asia Horse that those are optional, but I'll include links below to everything so you can double check down there if that's something you want to add to your build. I definitely like the way they look. As I mentioned earlier, I did have to go back and fix that motherboard cable for the power supply, and then everything booted up fine. And I went ahead and cleaned up everything in the back of the case, and now we'll do the final peel. So some final thoughts and encouragement if you are considering building a PC is just take your time and use your resources. There's plenty of great videos on YouTube. There's plenty of helpful people on Reddit and other forums that will help you along the way. Once you get Windows installed, you can make sure to update the drivers for your graphics card, but also don't forget to update the chipset drivers and any other like CPU drivers, anything else that's required for the PC. Those were some things that I needed to update, and I also updated the BIOS on my motherboard. So those are some things to look into that might give you a little bit of a snag along the way. But I hope you enjoyed watching here, and be sure to like and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy this sort of content. If you have any questions or concerns while you're building your PC, leave a comment below, or just let me know if you enjoyed the video. Thanks again for hanging out, and have a great day.